The splash was barely audible over Karen's obnoxious laughter as she floated on her stolen pool float, champagne glass in hand. But when Marcus saw the small orange body sinking beneath the crystal-clear water, the same stray cat that had been his only companion during the darkest months of his life, something snapped inside him. Karen kept laughing, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding just feet away, her eyes closed in selfish bliss. She had no idea that her trespassing had just cost an innocent life, and she had no idea what Marcus was about to do about it. Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window, watching steam rise from his coffee mug as the morning sun painted his backyard in golden hues. The pool shimmered like a jewel, its surface disturbed only by the gentle hum of the filtration system. After 18 months of saving every penny from his consulting business, he'd finally been able to afford the renovation. The old concrete eyesore had been transformed into an infinity pool, with natural stone coping and integrated LED lighting. It was his sanctuary, the one place where he could forget about the divorce, the custody battle, and the crushing loneliness that had consumed him since Sarah left. The sound of a car door slamming broke his reverie. Marcus frowned, checking his watch. 9:47 a.m. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his neighbors were typically at work by now. He moved to the front window and felt his stomach drop. Karen Whitmore was strutting up his driveway like she owned the place, her bleached hair catching the sunlight and her designer sunglasses perched atop her head. She wore a barely there bikini that left nothing to the imagination and carried a designer beach bag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind her, she dragged a massive pool float shaped like a flamingo. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered, setting down his coffee with more force than necessary. Karen had been his neighbor for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made his life a living hell. She'd filed noise complaints when he used his lawnmower after 8 a.m. on weekends. She'd called the city about his unsightly garden shed. She'd even tried to get him cited for parking his work van in his own driveway because it decreased property values. The Homeowners Association had laughed her out of their monthly meetings, but that hadn't stopped her from continuing her one campaign of harassment. He watched in disbelief as she unlatched his side gate and disappeared into his backyard. The sheer audacity of it took his breath away. Marcus grabbed his phone and headed for the back door, already dialing 911. 911? What's your emergency? This is Marcus Chen at 1247 Maple Drive. I have a trespasser on my property whose the words died in his throat as he stepped onto his patio. Karen had already inflated her ridiculous flamingo float and was now slowly lowering herself into his pool, a glass of what looked like champagne in her hand. "Sir, are you there?" Yes, I'm here. I have a woman who's trespassing in my backyard and using my pool without permission. Is she armed or threatening you in any way?" Marcus watched Karen settle onto her float with a satisfied sigh, her eyes closed as she tilted her face toward the sun. "No, she's just making herself at home. We'll send an officer when one becomes available." Non-emergency, trespassing. Calls are currently running about a 2-hour delay. 2 hours, Marcus's voice cracked. "She's in my pool right now. Sir, if she's not threatening you or causing property damage, this is classified as a civil matter. You might want to try asking her to leave first." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone in disbelief before shoving it into his pocket. He walked to the edge of his patio, close enough to speak without shouting. "Karen, what the hell do you think you're doing?" She opened one eye and looked at him with the kind of lazy contempt usually reserved for insects. "Oh, hi Marcus. I hope you don't mind, but your pool looked so inviting." "Mind? Of course I mind. This is my property, Karen. You can't just waltz in here and relax, honey." She waved her champagne glass dismissively, sending droplets flying. "I'm not hurting anything. It's just a little water." Marcus felt his blood pressure spiking. "Just a little water. Karen, you're trespassing. I could have you arrested." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, please. For what? Taking a dip in your precious pool. I've seen you through your windows, Marcus. You're always alone. Always working. When was the last time you actually used this thing?" "I'm probably the first person to enjoy it in months." The words hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't wrong. He'd been so consumed with work and the ongoing legal battles with Sarah that he'd barely had time to enjoy his investment. But that wasn't the point. "That's not your decision to make," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Get out of my pool now." "Or what?" Karen settled back on her float, closing her eyes again. "You'll call the police. Go ahead. I'll tell them you were watching me through your windows. Peeping Tom behavior is a serious crime. Marcus, I live. Here, of course, I look out my windows. M.H.M. She took a sip of her champagne. "You know, you should really thank me. I'm doing you a favor by testing your water quality, making sure all that money you spent wasn't wasted." Marcus opened his mouth to respond when a flash of orange caught his eye. A small cat had appeared at the far end of his yard, picking its way carefully through the flower beds. It was thin to thin with matted fur and a slight limp in its back leg. Marcus recognized it immediately. The cat had been showing up for weeks, usually in the early morning or just before sunset. Marcus had started leaving small bowls of food on his patio, though he'd never managed to get close enough to touch the animal. It was skittish, clearly feral, but there was something about its persistence that reminded him of his own struggle to rebuild his life after everything fell apart. Well, Karen said, having noticed the cat as well. "Looks like you've got yourself a little vagrant problem, too." The cat froze at the sound of her voice, its green eyes darting between Marcus and the pool. It was clearly thirsty. Marcus could see it from the way it kept looking at the water. "Easy, buddy," Marcus said softly, crouching down and extending his hand. "It's okay." The cat took a tentative step forward, then another. It had almost reached the pool's edge when Karen suddenly sat up on her float, sending waves across the previously still surface. "Shoo!" she yelled, clapping her hands. "Go on, get out of here." The sound echoed off the surrounding houses like a gunshot. The cat startled, its feet scrambling for purchase on the wet stone coping. For a moment, it seemed like it might regain its balance. Then it fell. The splash was small, barely audible over Karen's renewed laughter. But Marcus heard it like thunder. The cat's head surfaced once, its eyes wide with terror as it struggled against the water. Its thin body wasn't built for swimming. It was too malnourished, too weak. "Oh my God!" Marcus breathed, diving toward the pool. But Karen was floating directly in his path, her massive flamingo taking up nearly half the shallow end. By the time he could navigate around her, the cat had gone under. Marcus plunged into the water, his clothes weighing him down as he searched desperately. The pool was only 4 feet deep at this end, but the cat was nowhere to be seen. He felt along the bottom, his hands scraping against the stone, until finally his fingers closed around something soft and still. He surfaced, gasping, the small, orange body limp in his arms. Marcus pressed his ear to its chest, hoping against hope for a heartbeat. Nothing. "Well," Karen said, settling back on her float with obvious satisfaction. "I guess that takes care of your pest problem." Marcus looked up at her, water streaming from his hair and clothes, the dead cat cradled against his chest. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. All the months of harassment, all the petty cruelties, all the nights he'd lain awake wondering how someone could be so deliberately, pointlessly cruel, all crystallized into a single burning point of rage. "You killed it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't kill anything," Karen replied, not even bothering to look at him. "Stupid animals should have known better than to come around here. Natural selection at work." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then carefully climbed out of the pool. He knelt on the stone coping and tried CPR on the cat, pressing gently on its tiny chest, breathing into its small lungs. But it was too late. The life had already gone out of those green eyes. "You're getting my pool all messy," Karen complained. "Can't you do that somewhere else?" Marcus stood slowly, the dead cat still in his arms. His clothes clung to his body, and water dripped steadily onto the warm stone. He walked to his garden shed and retrieved a small towel, carefully wrapping the cat's body before placing it gently in the shade of his rose bushes. When he turned back to the pool, Karen was still there, still floating, still sipping her champagne as if nothing had happened, as if a life hadn't just ended because of her casual cruelty. "I want you to leave," Marcus said. "I'm not done with my swim. I want you to leave now." Karen opened her eyes and looked at him with mild annoyance. "You're all wet, Marcus. You should probably go inside and change before you catch cold." Something in her tone, the dismissive condescension, the complete lack of awareness or remorse, Marcus stood in his kitchen, dripping onto the Italian tile flooring that Sarah had insisted on during their last renovation. The silence from the backyard was deafening. He stared at the coffee mug he'd abandoned earlier, steam no longer rising from its surface. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the ceramic slipping from his wet fingers and shattering against the floor. The sound jolted him back to reality. What have I done? He rushed to the window, pressing his face against the glass. The pool cover stretched taut across the water, its dark surface giving no indication of what lay beneath. There was no movement, no sound, no sign of Karen's ridiculous flamingo float or her perfectly manicured hands clawing at the cover's edge. Marcus's breath fogged the window as panic set in. He'd meant to scare her, to give her a taste of helplessness. He'd planned to turn off the cover system after a few seconds, to let her scramble out, soaked and humiliated. But the silence had stretched on, and now ... his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number saw Karen go into your backyard about an hour ago. She's not answering her phone. Is everything okay? Janet from 1251, Janet Morrison, Karen's only friend in the neighborhood, probably the only person who could tolerate her poisonous personality. Marcus's blood turned to ice. If Janet had seen Karen come over, if she'd been watching ... another buzz. This time from his security system app, motion-detected front door camera. Marcus pulled up the feed on his phone. A silver BMW was pulling into his driveway. He recognized the car. It belonged to Chad Whitmore, Karen's husband. The man climbed out, adjusting his expensive suit and checking his Rolex with the efficiency of someone who billed by the hour. Chad was a corporate lawyer, the kind of man who'd never lost a case because he only took the ones he was guaranteed to win. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime echoing through the house like a death knell. Marcus looked down at his soaked clothes, then at the broken coffee mug scattered across the floor. He couldn't answer the door like this, but he couldn't not answer it either. Chad would know he was home. His car was in the driveway, and there were lights on throughout the house. "Just a minute," Marcus called out, his voice cracking slightly. He rushed to his bedroom and stripped off his wet clothes, throwing on the first things he could find, a pair of jeans and a Stanford t-shirt that Sarah had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was wearing a shirt given to him by someone who'd left him while trying to cover up the fact that he'd just, murdered someone? The word hit him like a physical blow. Murder. That's what this was, wasn't it? Pool cover, knowing Karen was trapped underneath. He'd stood in his kitchen and listened to her scream, listened to the screaming stop, and he'd done nothing. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Marcus forced himself to walk to the front door, each step feeling like he was walking. Through quicksand, he could see Chad's silhouette through the frosted glass, tall and imposing even in shadow. Marcus took a deep breath and opened the door. "Chad, hi." Chad Whitmore looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine advertisement for expensive whiskey. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled. His suit probably cost more than Marcus's monthly mortgage payment, and his smile was the kind of predatory grin that had made him rich, destroying people in courtrooms. "Marcus, good to see you." Chad's voice carried the false warmth of a man who'd never met a stranger he couldn't manipulate. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I'm looking for Karen. Janet said she saw her come over here earlier." Marcus's mouth went dry. "Karen, no, I haven't seen her today." It was the first lie, and it slipped out so easily that it terrified him. Chad's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, the way a shark might adjust its course when it catches the scent. "Of blood? Huh? That's strange. Janet was pretty certain she saw her head over here around 10 this morning. Said she was carrying some kind of pool float." Chad's gaze shifted past Marcus, trying to peer into the house. "Mind if I come in for a minute? Maybe we can figure out where she went." "Actually, now's not a great time," Marcus said, stepping. "Work calls. You know how it is." Chad's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, the consulting business, right? Must be doing well. That's quite a pool renovation you did back there." The comment felt like a trap, though Marcus couldn't figure out why. "Thanks. It was a lot of work, I bet. Mind if I take a quick look around your backyard? Maybe Karen left something that might give us a clue where she went." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. "I don't think that's necessary. Like I said, I haven't seen her, right? Chad pulled out his phone and showed Marcus the screen. It displayed a GPS tracking app with a small red dot pulsing steadily. The thing is, Marcus Karen's phone shows she's still here. Right here, actually, in your backyard. The world tilted on its axis. Marcus gripped the doorframe to steady himself. Her phone. Find my iPhone. Wonderful technology, isn't it? We started using it after Karen had a few too many wine-soaked afternoons and forgot where she parked. Chad's laugh was as sharp as broken glass. According to this, she's been in your backyard for the past hour and a half. Hasn't moved more than a few feet. Marcus's mind raced. The phone had to be in the pool, probably sunk to the bottom, along with Karen's body. But how could he explain that without revealing what had happened? Maybe she dropped it, Marcus suggested. Weakly, maybe. Chad slipped the phone back into his pocket. You know what? I think I'll just hop over your fence and take a quick look. Won't take but a minute. Chad's eyebrows shot up. Trespassing? Marcus, my wife, is missing, and her phone says she's in your backyard. I think any reasonable person would consider that an emergency situation. She's not missing. She's probably just went for a walk and forgot her phone. Marcus realized he was trapped. Every word he said was digging him deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. Look, Marcus said, trying to inject some authority into his voice. I understand you're worried about Karen, but I can't just let you go wandering around my property. If you're really concerned, call the police. The moment the words left his mouth, Marcus knew he'd made a mistake. Chad's smile turned predatory. Call the police. Why would I need to call the police if my wife just went for a walk? I didn't mean unless you think something might have happened to her. Chad stepped closer, and Marcus caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else, the metallic scent of barely controlled rage. Is there something you're not telling me, Marcus? No? Because if something has happened to my wife, if she's been hurt, or ... worse, and you know about it, that makes you an accessory. And trust me, Marcus, I've made a career out of destroying people who lie to me. The threat hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Marcus could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Chad was right, he was trapped. If he continued to deny seeing Karen, and her body was found in his pool, he'd look guilty of premeditated murder. But if he admitted she'd been there and tried to claim it was an accident... I need to call my lawyer, Marcus said quietly. Chad's smile widened until it was almost feral. Now, why would you need to do that, Marcus? I thought you said you hadn't seen my wife. Before Marcus could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. This one was a police cruiser, its presence immediately transforming the entire situation. Marcus felt his knees go weak as Officer Daniel Rodriguez climbed out, his uniform crisp and his expression professionally neutral. Mr. Whitmore, Rodriguez, approached them with the easy confidence of someone who'd handled thousands of domestic situations. I got your call about a possible missing person. Chad turned to face the officer, his demeanor instantly shifting into concerned husband mode. Officer Rodriguez, thank you for coming so quickly. My wife Karen was supposed to meet me for lunch, but she never showed up. Her phone's GPS shows she's been in Mr. Chun's backyard for over an hour, but he claims he hasn't seen her. Rodriguez looked between the two men, his trained eye taking in Marcus's pale complexion and Chad's perfectly composed exterior. Mr. Chen, is it mind if I ask you a few questions? Marcus knew that anything he said could be used against him. To cooperate would only make him look more guilty. Of course. When's the last time you saw Mrs. Whitmore? The question was simple, direct, and absolutely loaded with implications. Marcus looked at Chad, who was watching him with the intensity of a predator studying its prey. He looked at Officer Rodriguez, whose pen was poised over his notepad, ready to record whatever Marcus said, and then he looked past them both toward his backyard. Where Karen's body lay trapped beneath the pool cover, her phone probably resting on the bottom of the pool like a digital gravestone. I saw her this morning, Marcus said quietly, around 10 o'clock. Chad's eyes glittered with triumph. I thought you said you... The Riverside County Sheriff's Department interview room smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. Marcus sat across from Detective Sarah Castellanos, a woman whose weathered face and tired eyes suggested she'd heard every possible variation of human cruelty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look guilty. "So let me get this straight," Detective Castellano said, consulting her notes. "Mrs. Whitmore was trespassing in your pool. You asked her to leave. She refused. A stray cat fell in and drowned. And then you... what? Decided to teach her a lesson." Marcus stared at his hands, still cuffed despite being in custody for 6 hours. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. But it did happen. You activated the pool cover with Mrs. Whitmore inside. You knew she couldn't get out. I was angry at the cat. Marcus's voice broke. She killed that cat. She scared it into the pool and then laughed about it, called it natural selection. Detective Castellanos leaned back in her chair, studying, him with the practiced gaze of someone who'd spent 20 years separating truth from fiction. "Tell me about your relationship with Mrs. Whitmore." For the next hour, Marcus laid out 3 years of harassment, petty complaints, and escalating hostility. He told her about the noise complaints, the calls to City Hall, the HOA meetings where Karen had tried to make his life miserable. Detective Castellanos listened without interruption, taking notes with the methodical precision of someone building a case. "Sounds like you had plenty of reason to dislike her," she said finally. "I didn't kill her because I disliked her," Marcus said, looking up for the first time. "I killed her because she was cruel. There's a difference, is there? Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found an excuse to do something you'd been wanting to do for a long time." Before Marcus could respond, there was a knock on the door. Detective Castellanos stepped out, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the steady hum of the fluorescent lights. She returned 10 minutes later with a grim expression. "We've recovered the body. Coroner's preliminary examination suggests drowning, but we're waiting for the full autopsy." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "What happens now? Now we wait for the DA to decide what charges to file. Could be manslaughter, could be second-degree murder. Depends on whether they think you planned this or if it was a crime of passion. And if I cooperate, cooperation's always appreciated, Mr. Chen. But in this case, you've already confessed. The question isn't whether you did it, tits, why you did it and how the jury's going to react to that. Why?" The door opened again, and Marcus's court-appointed attorney walked in. David Kim was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe 35, with the kind of earnest expression that suggested he still believed the system worked. He carried a briefcase that had seen better days and wore a suit that probably came from Men's Warehouse. "Mr. Chen, I'm David Kim. I'll be representing you." He sat down next to Marcus and opened his briefcase. "I've reviewed the initial police reports and your confession. We need to talk about your options." "What options?" "I killed her. You killed her." "Yes, but the circumstances matter a lot." David pulled out a legal pad covered in handwritten notes. "I've been doing some research on Mrs. Whitmore. Did you know she'd been arrested twice for assault in the past 5 years?" Marcus blinked. Assault, bar fights, road rage incident. Both cases were settled out of court, but there's a pattern of aggressive behavior. More importantly, I've been talking to your neighbors. Janet Morrison, despite being Karen's friend, admitted that Karen had been harassing you for years. She said, and I quote, "Karen could be a real bitch when she wanted to be." Detective Castellanos frowned. "Where are you going with this, counselor?" "I'm establishing that my client was the victim of a sustained harassment campaign. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was the culmination of years of psychological abuse. He activated a pool cover with a woman inside," Detective Castellanos said flatly. "That's not self-defense." "No, but it might be temporary insanity or extreme emotional disturbance. The death of the cat was the triggering event, but the harassment created the underlying psychological condition." Marcus listened to them discuss. His mental state, like he wasn't in the room, it felt surreal, like they were debating the motivations of a character in a movie rather than his actual life. "What about the cat?" Marcus asked suddenly. Both lawyers looked at him. "What about it?" David asked. "Did anyone? Did anyone find the cat?" Detective Castellanos consulted her notes. "Animal control removed a dead cat from your property. Orange tabby, approximately 2 years old, severely malnourished. Why, I want to bury it properly." "Mr. Chen," David said gently, "I think we have bigger concerns right now, do we?" Marcus met his attorney's eyes. That cat was the only living thing that trusted me. Karen killed it for no reason other than cruelty. If I'm going to prison, I want to know it was buried with dignity." Detective Castellanos and David exchanged a look. Finally, the detective nodded. "I'll see what I can do." 2 hours later, Marcus was back in his cell, staring at the concrete walls and trying to process everything that had happened. The other inmates mostly ignored him. Word had gotten around that he was in for murder, which earned him a certain respect in the county jail hierarchy. His cellmate was a man named Tony Ramirez. In for his third DUI, Tony was philosophical about incarceration, treating it like an occupational hazard rather than a catastrophe. "So what did you do?" Tony asked. "Settling onto his bunk with a paperback novel, Killed My Neighbor." Marcus found himself telling the story again, this time to an audience that seemed genuinely interested rather than professionally obligated to listen. Tony nodded along, occasionally making sounds of approval. "Sounds like the bitch had it coming," Tony said when Marcus finished. "You ever heard of the battered woman defense? I'm not a woman. Same principle, though. Someone pushes you and pushes you until you snap. Happens all the time. My cousin Luis, he killed a guy who kept messing with his daughter. Jury gave him 5 years. He was out in 3. This is different, is it? You said she was harassing you for years, filing false complaints, trying to get you in trouble with the city. That's psychological abuse, man. Then she kills your cat and laughs about it." Tony shook his head. "Nah, that's not murder. That's justice." The word hung in the air between them. Justice. It's what Marcus had felt when he'd closed his door and listened to Karen's screams fade into silence. But was it really justice, or was it just revenge dressed up in prettier clothes? That night, Marcus lay on his thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the cat. He'd never even given it a name, but it had shown up every day for weeks, trusting him enough to get closer and closer. It had been making progress, learning to trust again despite whatever trauma had made it feral in the first place. And Karen had destroyed that trust in a single moment of casual cruelty. The next morning, David Kim returned with news. The DA's office is offering a plea deal. Voluntary manslaughter, 8 to 12 years. You'd be eligible for parole in 6. And if I go to trial, if you go to trial and lose, you're looking at life in prison. The DA is under pressure to make an example of you. Suburban dad kills neighbor in pool is the kind of headline that makes careers, Marcus thought. About it. 6 years minimum for killing someone who'd made his life hell, who'd destroyed something innocent just because she could. It seemed almost reasonable, David continued. I've been investigating Mrs. Whitmore's background. More thoroughly, she wasn't just a difficult neighbor, she was a predator. What do you mean? David pulled out a file folder. 3 years ago, she filed a harassment complaint against an elderly man named Walter Morrison, Janet's father. Claimed he was peeping into her windows, making inappropriate comments. The stress of the investigation gave him a heart attack. He died before the case could be resolved. Marcus felt his blood run cold. She killed him, she destroyed him. Turns out the whole thing was fabricated. Walter had dementia. He wouldn't have been capable of the behavior she described. But the investigation process, the humiliation, the fear, it killed him as surely as if she'd put a gun to his head. Jesus, it gets worse. I found 2 other cases where she'd made similar accusations. Both men ended up losing their jobs, their reputations, their families. One attempted suicide. David leaned forward, his expression intense. Marcus Karen Whitmore wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a sociopath who destroyed lives for entertainment. The cat wasn't an isolated incident, it was her pattern. She found weak, vulnerable targets, and she tormented them until they broke. Marcus stared at the file, seeing Karen's actions in a new light. The harassment hadn't been random, it had been calculated, deliberate, designed to wear him down until he did something stupid. The only difference was that this time, her victim had fought back. So what does this mean for my case? It means we have grounds for a temporary insanity defense. A jury might understand that you reached a breaking point, that you weren't in control of your actions when you activated that pool cover. But I was in control, Marcus said quietly. I knew exactly what I was doing. David's face fell. Marcus, please don't say that in court. The courtroom was packed. The suburban sociopath had become a trending hashtag. Cable news shows debated whether Marcus was a cold-blooded killer or a victim. who'd finally fought back. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in a borrowed suit, watching the jury selection process with detached fascination. David had wanted to delay the trial, to let the media circus die down, but Marcus had refused. He wanted this over with. "The prosecution is going to paint you as a monster," David whispered during a brief recess. "They're going to say, you planned this, that you lured Karen over so you could kill her. Did they find any evidence of that? No. But they don't need evidence. They just need to create doubt about your story." Across the courtroom, District Attorney Rebecca Shaw was organizing her files with military precision. She was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp intelligence that had made her a rising star in the DA's office. This case was her ticket to higher office, and she wasn't going to let sentimentality about dead cats and neighborhood harassment get in her way. The jury was sworn in after 2 days of selection. 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from 2 to 68. Marcus tried to read their faces, to guess how they'd react when they heard what he'd done, but they remained professionally neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Shaw began her opening statement. "This case is about a man who decided that his neighbor's life was worth less than his own convenience. Marcus Chen didn't kill Karen Whitmore in self-defense. He didn't kill her in a moment of passion. He killed her because she annoyed him." Shaw painted a picture of premeditated murder of a man who'd harbored resentment for years and finally found an excuse to act on it. She described the pool cover system, emphasizing how Marcus would have known exactly what would happen when he activated it. "The defendant wants you to believe that a dead cat drove him to murder," Shaw continued. "But Karen Whitmore didn't kill that cat. The cat fell into the pool accidentally and tragically drowned. Mrs. Whitmore was guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time." When David Kim stood for his opening statement, the courtroom fell silent. He was clearly outmatched by Shaw's experience and resources. But he had something she didn't: the truth about Karen Whitmore. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about a dead cat. It's about a predator who destroyed lives for 20 years, and the man who finally stopped her." David's voice was steady, confident. "You're going to hear testimony about Karen Whitmore. Victims: Walter Morrison, dead at 73 after she falsely accused him of sexual harassment. James Patterson, who attempted suicide after she destroyed his career with fabricated complaints. Michael Torres, whose marriage ended when she convinced his wife he was stalking her." David walked closer to the jury box. "Marcus Chen didn't murder Karen Whitmore. He executed her. And while the law may not distinguish between the two, justice does." The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days. They called Chad Whitmore, who portrayed his wife as a devoted community member who'd been trying to help improve the neighborhood. They called the medical examiner who confirmed that Karen had drowned. They called the pool contractor who'd installed Marcus's cover system, who testified that the safety features had been deliberately disabled, but it was Janet Morrison's testimony that proved most damaging. "Karen could be difficult," Janet admitted under oath, "but she wasn't evil. She was just ... particular about how things should be." "Did she ever tell you she was afraid of the defendant?" Shaw asked. "She said Marcus gave her the creeps. Always watching her through his windows, staring at her when she was in her backyard. She thought he might be developing an unhealthy obsession." Marcus watched the jury's faces as Janet spoke. Several jurors were taking notes, and he could see the doubt creeping into their expressions. Shaw was turning Karen from predator to victim with surgical precision. David's cross-examination was brutal. "Mrs. Morrison, you mentioned that Karen thought Marcus was watching her. Did you ever see him doing this?" "Well, no, but did Karen ever provide any evidence of this alleged stalking behavior?" "She didn't need to provide evidence. I believed her, even though she'd lied to you about other neighbors before." Janet's face flushed. "I don't know what you mean." David pulled out a folder. "Your father, Walter Morrison. Karen accused him of sexual harassment just months before his death. Did you believe those accusations too?" "Objection," Shaw called. "Relevance goes to the witness's credibility and her relationship with the deceased," the judge ruled. "I'll allow it." Janet's composure cracked. "My father was sick. He had dementia. Karen said she was trying to protect the neighborhood from a 73-year-old man with dementia." Objection, argumentative, sustained. The jury had seen Janet's doubt, her realization that her best friend might not have been who she thought she was. The defense case began with Walter Morrison's daughter, Linda. She was in her 50s, a nurse who'd taken care of her father during his final years. "My father was gentle," she testified, tears streaming down her face. "Even with the dementia, he was never inappropriate, never aggressive." When Karen made those accusations, it destroyed him. He kept asking me why someone would say such terrible things about him. "What happened after the investigation began?" David asked. "He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He was convinced everyone thought he was a monster. The stress triggered a massive heart attack. He died thinking the whole world believed he was a predator." David called two other victims of Karen's harassment campaign, Michael Torres, whose wife had left him after Karen convinced her that Michael was dangerous. The pattern was clear. Karen identified vulnerable men, usually loners or recent divorcees, and systematically destroyed their lives with false accusations. And manufactured evidence. She got off on the power, Michael Torres testified. But it was Marcus's own testimony that would determine his fate. David had coached him extensively, trying to get him to express remorse, to claim temporary insanity, to give the jury something they could hang a lesser verdict on. But Marcus had been clear he would tell the truth, all of it. "Mr. Chen," David began, "please tell the jury what happened on the morning of March 15th. He told them about watching Karen trespass in his pool, about her dismissive arrogance when he asked her to leave. He described the cat's appearance, its obvious hunger and fear, and how it had been making progress in trusting him. She scared it on purpose," Marcus said. "What did you feel in that moment?" "Rage, pure, absolute rage. Not just at Karen, but at everything she represented, the cruelty, the casual destruction of innocent things, the way she'd poisoned my neighborhood, my life, for years. And when you activated the pool cover, this was the moment everything hinged on." David had begged him to claim it was an accident, or that he'd intended to turn it off quickly. The jury wanted to hear that he was sorry, that he hadn't meant for anyone to die. "I knew exactly what I was doing. I wanted her to feel helpless. I wanted her to understand what it was like to be trapped, to be at someone else's mercy. And when she started screaming," Marcus paused, meeting the eyes of each juror. "I stood there and I listened until she stopped. I killed Karen Whitmore deliberately," Marcus continued, "not because she was in my pool, not because of years of harassment, but because she murdered an innocent animal for no reason other than cruelty. And in that moment, I decided that the world would be better without her." David's face was pale. Shaw was frantically scribbling notes, probably already preparing her closing argument around Marcus's confession. "Do you regret what you did?" David asked quietly. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I regret that it came to that," he said finally. "I regret that Karen Whitmore was the kind of person who made such a choice necessary. But do I regret stopping her? No, I don't." The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. Shaw used Marcus's own words against him. But deliberate, premeditated murder. He listened to Karen Whitmore die, and he felt no remorse. David's closing was passionate but futile. Karen Whitmore was a predator who destroyed lives for sport. Marcus Chen did what the legal system couldn't. He stopped her. Yes, he took the law into his own hands. But sometimes, when the system fails, good people have to make impossible choices. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they reached, he worked in the prison library, helping inmates prepare for their GEDs and legal appeals. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd found more purpose behind bars than he'd had in his final years of freedom. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the regular mail call, unchanged despite everything that had happened between them. "Marcus, I know I have no right to contact you after all this time. I know I abandoned you when you needed me most, and I've carried that guilt every day since the trial. Emma starts high school next month. She asks about you sometimes, not about what you did, but about who you were before. I tell her about the man who used to read her bedtime stories, who taught her to ride her bike, who cried when she took her first steps. The neighborhood has changed since you've been gone. The Whitmore house sold 6 months after the trial. New families have moved in. There are children playing in yards again, neighbors talking over fences. It's like a spell was broken. I know this doesn't change anything. I know I can't undo leaving you when you were struggling. But I wanted you to know that what you did, however wrong, it was legally it freed people. Says she didn't realize how much tension she'd been carrying all those years. Emma wants to visit you. I know you probably don't want to see me, but maybe you'd like to see her. She's become an amazing young woman, kind like you used to be. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything. Sarah Marcus read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in the wooden box where he kept his few precious possessions. The idea of seeing Emma again filled him with both longing and terror. She'd been 7 when he was arrested, old enough to understand that Daddy had done something terrible, but young enough to still love him despite it. That evening, during recreation time, Marcus found himself in the yard talking with Father Miguel, the prison chaplain who'd become something like a friend over the past year. She wants to bring my daughter to visit, Marcus said, showing him the letter. Father Miguel read it carefully, his weathered face thoughtful. What's holding you back? What if she's afraid of me? What if seeing me in here destroys whatever good memories she has left? Or what if it helps her understand that people are more complex than their worst moments? Marcus had been wrestling with questions of redemption and forgiveness since the trial. The other inmates largely respected him killing a predator who tormented innocent people, carried weight in a place where many had been victims themselves. But respect wasn't the same as absolution. Do you think I'm a good man who did a terrible thing, or a terrible man who happened to do something necessary? Marcus asked. I think you're a human being who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, Father Miguel replied. The question isn't whether you're good or bad, it's whether you're willing to live with the consequences and try to build something meaningful from them. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in the visiting room, his hands trembling as he waited. When the 7-year-old with pigtails had become a teenager with Sarah's intelligent eyes and his own stubborn chin. Hi, Dad, she said simply, sitting across from him at the plastic table. For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. Hi, sweetheart, you've gotten so tall. They talked for an hour about ordinary things, her classes, her friends, her plans for high school. Sarah mostly stayed quiet, letting them reconnect. Marcus looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who was brave enough to visit her father in prison, honest enough to ask the hard questions. He thought about lying, about giving her an answer that would make her feel better about having a killer for a father. Instead, he told her about the cat. There was this stray that had been coming around our house, he began. It was scared, hungry, but it was learning to trust me. And Mrs. Whitmore, she heard it just because she could, just because it made her feel powerful. Emma listened without interrupting as Marcus explained about Karen's pattern of cruelty, about the other victims, about the moment when something inside him had snapped. I'm not proud of what I did, he concluded. Taking someone's life is never something to be proud of. But I'm not sorry I stopped her from hurting anyone else. Emma was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, Mom told me about Mr. Morrison, about how he died. Your mom knew about that. Everyone knew. They just didn't want to believe it. Emma met his eyes. I think you're a good person who did a bad thing for good reasons. That doesn't make it right, but it doesn't make you a monster either. As they prepared to leave, Emma hugged him tightly. I love you, Dad, and I'm proud of you for telling the truth, even when it cost you everything. After they left, Marcus returned to his cell with a lighter heart than he'd carried in years. His cellmate, Diego, was reading a letter of his own. Good visit? Diego asked. Yeah, really good. That's the thing about this place, Diego said, folding his letter. It strips away all the bullshit. When people visit you here, when they write to you here, it's because they actually give a damn. Not because they have to. Convenient, but because they choose to. Marcus settled onto his bunk and pulled out a notebook. He'd been writing not a memoir or a justification, but stories about the people Karen had hurt. Walter Morrison's gentle nature, even in the grip of dementia, James Patterson's dedication to his students, the small orange cat that had trusted him enough to keep coming back. Someone needed to remember them as more than just victims. The next morning brought another surprise. His former attorney looked older, more successful, wearing a suit that actually fit properly. Marcus, you look good. Prison agrees with you. What are you doing? Here, David, I have news and a proposition. David opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. There's been a development in the Whitmore case. 3 more victims have come forward. Marcus felt his stomach clench. More victims. men whose lives she destroyed before she moved to your neighborhood. The pattern goes back 15 years. The DA's office is quietly reviewing cases, seeing if any charges can be posthumously overturned. David leaned forward. More importantly, there's a movement building. Families of Karen's victims, neighbors who witnessed her harassment campaigns, people who are tired of seeing bullies operate with impunity. They want to tell their stories. What does this have to do with me? They want you to help them. There's a documentary filmmaker, Maria Santos, who's interested in telling the full story. Not just about what you did, but about what Karen did. About how the system failed her victims. Marcus shook his head. I'm not interested in being the poster boy for vigilante justice. That's not what this is about. It's about accountability. About making sure people understand that Karen Whitmore wasn't some innocent woman who got killed by a psychotic neighbor. She was a predator who operated for decades, and you were the only one who stopped her. David pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a video. It was Linda Morrison, Walter's daughter, speaking to a camera in what looked like her living room. My father was a good man, she said, tears in her eyes. He served his country, raised 4 children, never hurt anyone in his life. Karen Whitmore destroyed his final years with lies, and the system let her do it. Marcus Chen did something wrong, but he also did something necessary. The documentary is called The Whitmore Files, David explained. It's about systemic failure, about how narcissistic predators can operate in plain sight because nobody wants to believe their neighbors are capable of such cruelty. Marcus watched more testimonials, Michael Torres talking about losing his marriage, James Patterson describing the shame of being fired from the job he loved, Janet Morrison admitting she'd known something was wrong, but had been too afraid to speak up. What would you want from me? Just the truth, your story, in your own words. Not to glorify what you did, but to provide context, to help people understand how someone gets pushed to that breaking point. Marcus closed the tablet and handed it back. I'll think about it. There's one more thing, David said. The victims' families are planning a memorial service. For Walter Morrison, for the cat, for everyone Karen hurt. They want to do it on the anniversary of her death. After David left, Marcus sat in the yard and watched the other inmates go through their daily routines. Some were genuinely dangerous men who belonged behind bars. Others, like Diego, were there because of bad choices made in desperate circumstances. And a few, like Marcus himself, had crossed lines they'd never imagined crossing. The question wasn't whether he'd been right or wrong. The law had already decided that. The question was whether his story could help prevent others from reaching the same breaking point. Whether the truth about Karen could spare future victims. That night, Marcus